Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This episode covers a session I played yesterday at Pechanga Casino. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of that place, and for those of you who haven't, I'm going to go over some of the pros and cons about this Southern California poker room. There's a lot of hands to go over, so I'm going to move through these kind of quick. Without any further ado, let's jump right in. The first thing I noticed about this place, which I think is great, is just how big the room is. There's a huge floor space, which allows for a lot of tables and a lot of room between each table, so it's not that cramped nonsense you get in many other poker rooms. Another thing that's great is that they offer games even during the slow parts of the week, and they offer all kinds of stakes. I think they have 1-2, 2-3, 2-5, and even bigger. So that's something to consider, especially if you're playing on like a random weekday where some other poker rooms don't have that many games to pick from. And lastly, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but they allow 100 big blind buy-ins, which for me is always a plus. I only played 2-3 no limit, so I'm not sure about the 1-2, but I'm sure at least the 2-3 and 2-5 allow for a full stack game. All right, moving on to some of the bad things about this location. The first thing I noticed is that the parking lot and poker room are about a 10-minute walk apart. Obviously, it's due to the nature of how big this property is. They have a ton of stuff in there, but it's just something to note, especially if you're gonna play there like frequently. You're looking at like 20 minutes of walking every day, which is not always something everyone wants to do. Secondly, I noticed a lot of the games are really reg heavy, and I've also heard that from a few friends who play there on the weekends as well, especially the higher stakes games like 2-5 and the occasional 5-10. It's just filled with pros, and that's just not something that a lot of people enjoy. This kind of ties into the next point, which is that the atmosphere in there doesn't feel super recreational and fun. It feels like very, let's all try to get each other's money. No jokes, no laughing, let's keep it quiet and just grind away. For some of you guys, that's something you prefer. Me personally, not really my thing. Lastly, it's not a huge deal. Obviously, it's person to person dependent, but for me, the chairs were super uncomfortable and my back was hurting the entire time I was playing, so that's just something I noticed and I wasn't a huge fan of. Overall, I give this place a 5 out of 10, all things considered. It's a nice room, but it's nothing special in my opinion, and the game quality isn't great, so I'm probably not looking to go back anytime soon, but I don't think it should be avoided either. Anyway, now that those things are out of the way, let's move on to some poker hands. I played 2-3 no limit, buy-in is 100 to 300, bought in for 300, so let's see if we can make some hands and book a win here at Pechanga. In this first hand, the straddle is on, and the under the gun player makes it $15 to go. When the straddle is on to $6, this is pretty much a min raise. Not sure what to make of it, but the action folds back around to me in the big blind, and I look down at pocket tens. The under the gun player started the hand with around $70, so I don't want to play pocket tens out of position. I'm happy to just 3-bet and get the money in right here. If she has a bigger pair, so be it, but with a hand this good, I think it's fine. I make it $70 to go. Unexpectedly though, the straddler makes the call, leaving himself with around $100 behind, and the under the gun player goes all in for her remaining stack. So we have a small side pot at this point, I think maybe like $20. Me versus the straddler, he has around 100 behind, and we're going to a flop, which comes 7-3 deuce rainbow. Looks like a good flop to me. I think pocket pairs bigger than 10s are going to put in a raise pre-flop and overcards missed. So I decided to get some value from hands like pocket 9s and pocket 8s, maybe even smaller pocket pairs that just get stubborn and don't believe me. However, the stack sizes are a little awkward here. I could set up 2 streets of value, or I could just get the money in right here. I decided I just want to get the money in. If a scared card comes like a king or a queen on the turn, we could be missing action from pocket 8s or pocket 9s, hands like that. So I decided to just go all in. I think he had 105 to be exact. He makes the snap call, so it doesn't look too good. I show my hand right away, and he shows pocket jacks. So I think that's probably the only hand that plays that way pre-flop that we're actually behind. Every other hand is either raising or we're ahead of. Kind of a shitty spot, but it is what it is. The board doesn't bring any help, and right off the bat, we lose a pretty big chunk of our stack. Time to top off, get back to 300, and see if we could run it back up. In this second hand, we look down at pocket kings from under the gun and make an open of $15. The button, small blind, and big blind call. So we're going 4 ways to a flop, which comes 10-10-3 with a flush draw. The small blind checks, the big blind checks. I decided to check on a board this dry. We're either going to be way ahead or way behind. Maybe it's better to bet multi-way, but as played, I checked it over to the button and he checked behind. So still looks like we're going to have the best hand the majority of the time, aside from obviously a slow played 10 or full house. The turn is the 9 of diamonds, bringing a second flush draw on board, and this time the small blind leads out for $30. The big blind folds. Obviously we're super under repped, not going anywhere just yet. I make the call, and the button calls behind me, which could be a little sketch, but shouldn't be too big of a deal. The river comes the 8 of diamonds, which is not a great card. A lot of draws get there, but when the small blind leads out for $60, we're getting a really good price, and we're still under repped, and we still beat missed clubs. So although I do expect to be behind some percentage of the time, I think a call is also fine here. Honestly, could go either way. I'm leaning more towards a fold because the button is behind me, but as the hand went down, the button looked really uninterested after the small blind bet on the river, and he already had his cards in his hands like he was getting ready to mug, so I wasn't too worried about him. I think about it for around 30 seconds and decided to make the call, although I definitely don't hate a fold. Sure enough, the small blind shows queen 10 off suit. Not running great so far. Let's move on to the next hand and see if we could finally win a pot. At this point, my table breaks and we pull for cards. I get moved to a table that looks much more fun than the one I was sitting at, but that's pretty much only because of one player who was in the 5 seat. I'm not sure if he was drunk or high or what was going on, but he was spazzing out all over the place. He couldn't stop moving, couldn't stop laughing, and he just made the game much better than the previous game. Also, he was pouring a lot of money into the middle without having anything worth putting money into the middle with. So that's something to keep in mind as we go on to these next few hands. In this first hand, he opens to $15 over 2 limpers. I decided to make the call, and both of the limpers make the call as well. So 4 ways to a flop, which is probably one of the better ones. 3, 7 with 2 spades. So we flop the nuts here. I decided to check it over to him as he was fairly aggressive. Both the limpers check, and sure enough, he puts in a bet of $35. Could go for a check raise here, but don't want him to go anywhere, and with the players behind me, I'm happy to let them draw to a spade as well. It's a little dangerous to play this way, but this time I decided to go for it. Unfortunately, both of the limpers fold, so it's just me and this fun player going heads up to the turn, which is the deuce of clubs, bringing in a second flush draw. Not sure how relevant that is, but just something to note. I decided to do something super fishy and player dependent in this case and lead out for $20 to make it look like a blocker bet and induce a raise. Sure enough, he wastes no time and makes it $130. At this point, if we call, we're gonna have around $60 or $70 behind, so pretty easy all-in spot. I put it all in and he doesn't think for too long before making the call. I show my hand and he shows 8-7 off suit. Top pair, can't go anywhere, right? The river is a 5 of clubs, so we hold, manage to get the full double up and get some much needed help. On to the next hand.
My prediction's wrong.
So while this guy was pretty crazy, everyone else at the table was actually fairly tight, which made the game not too good. Anyways, in this next hand, an early position player opens to $12. I decided to make the call in the small blind with queen 9 of clubs, and the big blind, who is a fairly tight player, also makes the call. So 3 ways to a flop, which comes queen 7 6 with 2 spades. I check it over to the aggressor, the big blind checks as well, and the early position player checks back. So I'm fairly certain we have the best hand now. The turn is an offsuit deuce, doesn't really change anything. I decide to lead out for value, make it $25. The big blind thinks for a little bit and calls, and the early position player folds. The river's an interesting card in the 10 of clubs. 9-8 gets there, but all the spades miss. So I think you could go either way with a bet or a check here. As played, I decided to check it over to him and evaluate, and he pretty quickly puts out a bet of $55. I actually think about this spot for a while because 1, we're not beating anything that he's betting for value, and 2, he just didn't seem like the type of player to bluff very often. However, as played, I think the majority of his range is going to be draws, and even if he has a 1 pair type hand, I expect him to check it back and just go to showdown. So after thinking about it for a while, I decided there was way more bluffs than value in his range, make the call, and he says good call and just folds his cards. He seemed a little frustrated at this point, but happy we made the right decision, and his frustration is going to come into play in the next hand. All right, in the next hand, which is literally the next shuffle, I look down at pocket 9s. The straddle is on, so when it folds around to me, I make it $20 to go. And the player who just tried to bluff me last hand is in the small blind now, looks down at his cards and immediately sticks his remaining stack in there, which was $140. The big blind and straddle fold, and the action gets back to me, and I think it's actually a close spot because I don't always expect to be ahead, but given the table dynamics and how frustrated he seemed after getting caught bluffing last hand, I think his range will include all pocket pairs. We're ahead of most of those, and all broadways, which we're flipping with. Given that there's dead money in the pot, that should always be a plus EV call. So it's gonna suck if he has an overpair to ours, but so be it. I put in the call, and he shows ace king offsuit. So we're off to the races here. The flop comes jack 6 6. The turn is a 10. And the river's an ace. So we lose that flip. Kind of sucks because it would have been a good start to building a big stack, but it seems we just can't get our traction going in this session. Let's see if we can pick it up from here. Okay, so a few minutes later, a pretty interesting hand develops where the early position player opens to $12, and that crazy fun player I mentioned earlier puts in the min raise to $24 from middle position. No point trying to interpret what the heck this means from this player type, so when I look down at ace king offsuit in late position, pretty easy 4-bet I think, being that this guy's range is super wide. I make it $100 to go. It folds back to the fun player. He has around 150 left, and he just rips it in there right away. I make the easy call, and luck would have it, he has pocket kings. So of all hands that this guy was going with, he wakes up with a monster. Obviously, we're a pretty big dog against kings. We're looking for an ace to save us. The dealer puts out the flop, and sure enough, there's an ace. Things get interesting though when the turn is an ace. One more ace, and we got a jackpot on our hands. Unfortunately, it's an 8. So almost had a jackpot. Seems unfair to complain about not hitting that when we were way behind. So happy to pick up this pot. Almost got the second jackpot of my life, which would have been cool, but still, at least we get the suck out, and it's nice to be the one who gets lucky from time to time. All right, so 2 more hands to go over before we wrap things up, and they're both kind of crazy, so hang on because things get a little weird. In this first one, the straddle is on, and the under the gun player makes it $20 to go. I'm next to act with 7-6 suited. Such a pretty hand, definitely not going anywhere, although I do think in some cases it's okay to fold this from early position. Obviously, I didn't drive all the way out to the casino to fold 7-6 suited, so I'm not folding. I get around 3 or 4 more callers on the left of me, which is obviously not great, but with a hand this pretty, it doesn't matter, especially when the flop comes 6-6-3 with 2 diamonds. Genius decisions, right? The straddler checks, the under the gun player checks, and I'm definitely going to put in a bet being that there's straight and flush draws available. I make it $50 to go. The player on my direct left calls, and when the action folds back to the button, he decides all his chips are going in the middle. $260. The action folds back to me, pretty easy call I think, so that's what I decide to do. And the player on my left folds. I show my cards right away, not looking to slow roll anyone, and he shows me Queen 8 of diamonds, which, surprising to say the least. We could easily have a better flush draw. He could be up against a full house already. It's not great to shove flush draws on a paired board, but it's 2-3 no limit. Anyway, we're in great shape until the turn is a deuce of diamonds and the river's a jack of diamonds. So we lose twice, send it to the other guy. We're not running too good. Let's see if we can win at least one more hand before wrapping up the session. Okay guys, this is the last hand. Let's see if we can make something happen. The straddle is on, the under the gun player limps, and I look down at pocket kings next to act. Beautiful hand, make it $25 to go. The straddler makes the call, and the limper makes the call. So 3 ways to a flop, which comes king, queen, 4 with 2 hearts. We have the board pretty locked up. Sure, there's some straight draws and some flush draws, but the straddler in this case was a fairly aggressive player who decided to put in a lot of money when he sensed weakness. So when the flop checked over to me, I just had to lay the trap in position and just check back. There's hardly any turns that we're not gonna like, so I'm pretty happy with this play, although I definitely don't mind a bet. Anyway, as played, I check it back, and the turn brings an offsuit jack. It checks to me once more, and it's definitely time to go for some value here. We put in a bet to $35, and the straddler right away goes all in for $200. That's kind of what I was talking about as far as the weakness thing. The guy in between folds, the action's back on me, easiest call of my life, put the money in, and he rolls over ace-10 of hearts. Okay, the river is a 7 of hearts, so we lose to a straight, and then we lose to a flush. I muck my cards, and he says, "You're bluffing, right?" All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's kind of a brutal loss, but let's see if we could turn things around. I'm gonna be vlogging from Commerce Casino next, I think, most likely. So if you guys are interested in checking that out, go ahead and subscribe. If you got anything out of this video, whether it's entertainment or maybe you might have even learned something, go ahead and give it a like. It helps the channel grow. It helps with the YouTube algorithm and all that stuff. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you guys again for watching. Thanks for all the support and the comments. Really appreciate all you guys reaching out. And as always, good luck out there. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.